Welcome to the Globalization of SMB webinar series. And I have a very, very special guest today, Mr. Richard Tubb from tubblog.co.uk. Welcome, sir.
Thank you for having me.
So let me take care of a little housekeeping here. What we're going to do is have a nice chat with Richard, but first let me tell you what we're up to here. This blog series started in December with Mr. Harry Brailsford, who was one of the first people that I know of in the SMB space to go traveling around the world and begin opening up some other markets and viewpoints for the rest of us. We had Robert Crane from Australia, Ken Edwards, who has built a business based on some really cool outsourcing stuff in China. And then Dave Sobel talked about some of the challenges of working across many borders. And coming up, we have Vijay Nayapati, who is from New Zealand right now, but has started businesses on 3 different continents and intentionally moved to New Zealand to set up a business. So he moved there from South Africa. Obviously, with that name, he's Indian, not South African. So he's got a really cool story about, intentionally going someplace to take advantage of the economy. So, and then we got some folks from TechSoup talking about how they are helping nonprofit agencies around the globe. And then my friend Todd Lay is going to be with us in July talking about hiring and managing employees in other countries. In terms of what I've got going, I would really appreciate it if everybody could join me for the online course that just finished. We finished our first hour 2 minutes before this podcast, and that is managing the service board. And that's a 5-week course, so you can jump in now. You'll get the recording from week 1, and then you can join us live for weeks 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to be live at the Channel Pro SMB Forum in San Jose next week, and live in Las Vegas the week after that for the Business Solutions Retail IT VAR of the Future program, where I'm a keynote speaker. And then we have the SMB Online Conference coming up in June, and that is 15 hours of education for one low price. So with all of these, if you just go to smallbizthoughts.com and click to sign up for my newsletter, you'll hear about all of those things. I always like to do some kind of a little book note, and this time it's really a series, not just a single book. There was a book called Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands, and it was so popular that now they have focused versions for different parts of the world. So in addition to just sort of a general overview, which is the one I would recommend you start with, they have versions for specific areas that you might want to do business with. The book in general is pretty good about cultural overviews and, sort of how do you make sure that you don't blunder when you do certain things. And, it's funny, I just was teaching this class and talking about the different ways that we use scheduled, the term scheduled as a status in your service board may not be what somebody would use in another country. For example, Richard might say that it was diarized, correct?
Yes, very good.
So, different areas use different terms. And so anyway, this is just kind of a book that's worth looking at. Also available as an audio book, a Kindle, and so forth. So if you don't want to get the paperback, you have other ways of consuming it. Our guest today is Mr. Richard Tubb, who is one of the great bloggers in our space. He is a former managed service provider owner, and he sold that off, and now he's a coach and a speaker, and he runs around the world educating people on managed services. And so, welcome, sir. The first question I have to ask you is, do you actually live in a castle?
That's such an American question, I've got to say, Carl, with absolutely no offense meant there. I've been asked that so many times by people, but the area I live in is called Wearley Castle, And we have actually got a castle. I don't live in it myself, but it's only 5 minutes away from where I am. So if you've got a picture of what Europe's like, Europe where the history's from, yes, we've got castles everywhere, and I've got a castle 5 minutes away from my house, although I don't live in it.
You don't live in the castle, but you live in an area that's called Wheelie Castle.
And we have a castle, yes.
Okay. Well, I have every intention of visiting you probably in November, and you can take me to the castle down the road. How about that for a deal?
I look forward to it.
So, and that's in West Midlands. So give us a geography lesson. Why is it called West Midlands versus whatever else? What's it in the middle of?
East Midlands. Well, sure. So Birmingham is central England, the heart of England. So we're slap bang in the centre of England. The West Midlands is the second biggest area in the UK behind. So you think of London, Birmingham, where I live, is the second city, and then you've got Manchester a little bit further north, which is nearby to Liverpool, which people will be familiar with because of the Beatles.
Exactly.
So I'm closer to Stratford-upon-Avon, which is also in the Midlands, or Staffordshire, I should say, just south of here. And, of course, Stratford-upon-Avon, famous for Mr. Shakespeare.
Exactly. All righty. And I'm going to come back to your screen, but let me just let you tell us about where you're going to be in the coming weeks, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's interesting we're talking about the globalization of IT, so I'm visiting two of Europe's major cities over the next few weeks. So I'm joining my friends at StorageCraft for their partner users group, where I'll be delivering a presentation there. That's in London on May the 14th. So if there's any UK-based MSPs are on the call today and would like to join us, please feel free. You can register there. Whether you're a StorageCraft customer or not, feel free to drop me a line if you want a guest invite to that. Look forward to seeing you there. And then I'm flying across to Stockholm in Sweden to join Upstream, who are one of the major distributors in that part of the world. And I'm speaking to a group of Nordic MSPs, and that's on May the 21st. So I know you and I, our respective blogs, we get a lot of readers from Europe. So if there's any readers or listeners from Sweden or the Nordic area who want to join me, May the 21st in Sweden. And you've very kindly given a shout out there, a link to my full event calendar. So if you would like to catch up with me of any of the events that I'm attending or speaking at over the next 12 months, you can find a full event calendar on tubblog.co.uk.
Excellent. And part of this, I just want to give people a background so they have a sense of who you are, what you do, and before we get into the big conversation. So you have an ebook. You have several ebooks, but this is your most recent one, I believe.
Indeed, yes. So my day-to-day work sees me working with IT business owners, service providers, MSPs, and probably the most common challenge that I see MSPs coming across is that they just feel overwhelmed with the amount of things that they have to do. In fact, I was going far to say that many MSPs who get in touch with me, unfortunately, they're almost drowning under the pressure of running an IT business, and I know many people on the call will empathize with that. Unfortunately, it's impossible for me to do one-on-one work with all of them, so I really just did a brain dump of everything that I learned over the years, some of which we'll touch upon in this call, I'm sure, of really learning to survive as an IT business owner, the techniques, the skills, the tools that you can use to actually make sure you get out on top there and start being in control of the business instead of the business being in control of you. So the IT Business Owner Survival Guide, out very, very shortly. And if you want to get anybody listening to the call today wants to get hold of a free chapter of that, they can get to itbusinesssurvivalguide.com and they'll get a free chapter and be notified when the book becomes available. Very good.
So I'm just going to cycle through these slides as we have our conversation. But one of the things that struck me when you put across your calendar is when I have something in another country, when I'm going to the UK or I'm going to Australia or New Zealand, that's a pretty big deal for me. I mean, even to be honest, because of where I'm located, Canada is a bit of a big deal. Vancouver is, a 3-hour flight north from here, and Toronto is literally 3,000 miles away. So, it's a big deal for me to be appearing in a different country. It doesn't seem to be that big of a deal. Obviously, Europe is much smaller, but do you find that the folks that you work with travel as much as you do?
I think there's probably less travel in Europe, it's fair to say. So, the number of events that I do in mainland Europe as opposed to the UK, not so often, so if I do 1 or 2 a year, that might be it. Whereas traveling around the UK tends to be very London-centric. So most of the events, most of the conferences and events that are put on tend to be in London. That's changing. The UK itself is a big place. So you've got Scotland, you've got Ireland, you've got Wales in there. And so there are more events cropping up here in different geographical locations. But for the most part, it does tend to be quite London-centric. And I know that even European-based events, so in other words, events that are targeting not only UK MSPs, but are targeting MSPs from wider Europe, and even further afield than that, they tend to be London-based as well. I guess it's an easy location for most people to get to, being a hub with lots of airports there. But I'd like to see a little bit more distribution of events outside of London. I think there's a lot of good parts of the UK that I'd love to see MSPs explore.
Right. Well, in the US, we have this issue where someone like Microsoft or Intel, for example, they will put on a tour, and of course they will go to Seattle, and they may or may not go to Portland because they think, well, all those people from Portland can just go to Seattle. They're never going to Tacoma, which is in between the two of them. They'll go to the Bay Area, but not to Sacramento, even though, we get more people at their events than the people in the Bay Area do, just because people here show up more. So a lot of there's sort of this sense that there's first-tier cities. London's the only first-tier city that they seem to be aware of in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, London itself is, the size of London as a city, it's a country in itself. Obviously you've got Birmingham, the second city that I mentioned, Edinburgh, Dublin, you've got Newcastle up in the northeast and that, but everything does tend to be centralised around London, and the vendors are missing a big trick because although London is densely populated and there are literally hundreds and thousands of MSPs, in the south of the country and in London alone, there are so many more thriving, really good-sized MSPs further afield. So I'd encourage any vendors, to get out there on the road. One of the things that strike me is, and perhaps we'll touch upon it in our conversation, Carl, but with the globalization of SMB, social media, the world is getting a smaller place. It's easier to do business with someone without meeting them face to face, to do business remotely from the other sides of the world. But there is no substitute for face-to-face contact. And then I was speaking to a large MSP vendor in the US who was saying that they're opening offices scattered all across the US, specifically because having feet on the ground local enables them to build up a much better relationship with people. It comes back to that old adage, I think, people do business with people they like, and there's no better way to build trust and like than getting to know people in person.
Right. Now, I'm trying to think, but I don't believe I've had any coaching clients in the UK. But I know my brother, Manuel, you and Manuel and I get together when we can to do a little Skype call. We're overdue. But he's had clients in the UK, and I know you've had clients in the US. Yeah. Has that been, is it much different doing a Skype call in real time to somebody in New York versus somebody in the UK?
Well, there's the obvious logistical problems of trying to get the world clock, the calendars matched up, different time zones. But quite apart from that, it is interesting the cultural differences. So although I have done work with US-based MSPs, and in fact it's been really interesting, the US-based MSPs, when they've approached me, of course, my first instinct is to say, well, I'm happy to work with you, but have you thought of working with someone more local to you? Carl, Manuel, others in our industry. And sometimes the US MSPs will say to me, Yeah, actually, we'd prefer to work with you because we like your style, we like the European way of doing things, and we want to learn a little bit more about that. So happy to work with people from that perspective, but there is a lot of cultural differences. So just the way things are done in different geographic locations. Pricing, of course, is an interesting one, the culture towards pricing. And in fact, I was only having a conversation with somebody just the other day. We were talking about the adoption of software as a service in different parts of the world. And although SaaS, Office 365, Google Apps and things, is taking off as much in the UK as it is in any other part of the world, here in the UK, historically and predominantly, there's a culture of ownership. So lots of MSPs I speak to, when they go out and talk to small businesses about replacing their server with something hosted in the cloud, there is a little bit more reluctance because I think the culture in the UK, broadly speaking, is one of ownership. Business owners still like to think they've got something tangible that they own. Now, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, Carl, but when I speak to US-based MSPs, that culture of ownership perhaps isn't as strong over there. And I'm intrigued. I think that's probably why services like Zipcar and Uber and those other services that are out there seem to take off in the US. And not to say they don't take off in the UK, but they seem to struggle a little bit more. People tend to want to own cars rather than rent them and things like that. So I'm actually interested to see if you agree with that and if that is a predominant culture.
I'd not thought about the fact that services like Uber and Zipcar are somehow related, but I think that you might be right, that there's kind of this attitude of, look, most people do not use Uber. Most people don't use Zipcar. I've actually got a former employee, my former marketing guy. He is always going to Zipcars. He loves to be able to take the train into downtown, and then he will go to one of these cars. And for folks who haven't heard of it, the Zipcar, you pay by the hour, you sign up for the service. When you go there, you take a car, and it includes the price of gas and the price of insurance. So you're paying by the hour for a car. So, if you don't want to add miles to your own car or deal with all the insurance crap in case you get into an accident when you're driving out of town, you just get a Zipcar and, you take it up to the town that's an hour away instead of using your own car, or if you don't have a car at all. So those kinds of things are kind of, I think you have to be willing to accept that somebody has figured out all the details on that. Americans are very conscious of, being sued and, everything. Everybody wants to make money by suing somebody, right? So we want to make sure that stuff, we have to have a confidence that that's been taken care of. But then, if we feel it is, then we're like, okay, I'll give this a try. And, if the price is right and you make it convenient enough, then it's worthwhile. So, and I think in terms of owning servers and whatever, there's two groups. There's really, the distribution isn't normal. It's got a lump and then another lump on the other side. So the one lump is people who absolutely want to own their own stuff, and they don't know why they would ever not own their own stuff. And these are people who don't sign leases. They just buy their servers. And then there's people who say, look, I don't care. It's blah, blah, blah technology. And as long as it works, I don't care, because if something goes wrong, I'm calling Richard. I am not calling Microsoft. I'm not calling HP. I'm not calling Dell. I'm not calling Symantec. I'm calling Richard. So if you make my stuff work in the cloud, great. If you make my stuff break in the cloud, then we got a problem. So I think that we have a fair number of people who sort of take that attitude, and that might be the more mature businesses as well.
Yeah, it could be. I think you've hit the nail on the head when you say it's about the type of business owner. It's perhaps here in the UK, one of my clients is Google Apps reseller, which is a completely different model to the traditional MSP model of selling tin and things. They don't really sell anything. They don't make much margin on the sale of Google Apps at all. They sell the services on top of it. But the type of clients that they work with tend to be young businesses, startups, creative businesses of that nature, specifically because the owners of those businesses tend to be younger people who have just grown up never knowing a server in the corner. They've used Facebook, they've used Google, Amazon, all these things. The thought of actually owning a piece of tin that sits in the corner and does these things, well, that's not my problem, Jack. I don't want to know about that. I just want to get the service up and running. So I think you're absolutely right when you say it's down to the mindset of the business owner as opposed to categorizing them any specific way.
Do you think that there are more small business owners in the UK as a percentage of people that you deal with?
I'm seeing I think this is a global thing, but I'm seeing a growing trend of small businesses and surrounded by clusters of freelancers. So, and I'd count myself in that category, Carl. So, I work essentially as a business coach. I write a lot of content and do business consultants with people. I work with a small number of MSPs, 8 at the moment that I work with, but they, as part of their extended team, I'm there as an advisor, I'm there as a sanity check for them. And I'm seeing this rise of freelancers. So instead of taking employees on with all the pains that come along, you and I have both employed people in the past, and that can be a double-edged sword and can be a pain at times. Why take people on if you can hire actual real experts in their field to come in and to do work with you? You may keep them on retainer, you may not, but there's a growing rise of small businesses who are thinking, I don't need to take people on. I'm going to outsource this work. I'm going to build up relationships with people who are experts. So if I give an example, within my own business, I've got a need, if I give one real brief example, with my podcast. I could sit there and listen to the podcast and transcribe it, but I outsource it to a lady in the Philippines who does phenomenal work transcribing my podcast in half the time it would take me.
Oh, right.
And certainly a quarter of the cost. I've also surrounded myself with experts. John at Rogue Productions is the person who looks after the production of and the editing of my videos and my podcast. My expertise, for want as it is to turn up and to interview people, to ask the right questions. Although I know a little bit about video editing and podcast editing, and I could probably get by, it's probably not the best use of my time, so I outsource those to other people. So I'm probably fairly typical of a small business in the UK who, a small number of employees, but then surrounds themselves with experts who do various bits and pieces much better than any full-time employee could. And interestingly, I think, for any MSPs listening, that's essentially what we, and I say that as a former MSP owner myself, what we're telling our clients to do. Right. We're saying, hey, you could hire a full-time IT person, but that person is going to have to be a jack of all trades. They're not going to have the depth of knowledge that we've got. You're going to have to pay them for holiday, for sick time. You're going to have to manage that person. Well, why not outsource it to us? You won't have to worry about managing us. We're really good at managing ourselves. You won't have to worry about people being off sick, holidays. We've just got it covered. And so I'm sort of surprised MSPs don't adopt that model themselves a little bit more and sort of surround themselves with experts who they could outsource and delegate this type of work to.
Right. Well, it's interesting. Sometimes we don't think of it as outsourcing, even though that's exactly what it is. I was just talking to some folks from Plan 27, which is it's a marketing group, and they will take over the management of your Google ad campaign. Am I buying a service just flat out, or am I outsourcing something I could be doing myself? If I go to Plan 27 and say, I want my managed service business to focus on Sacramento County and these keywords and whatever, it really is outsourcing something that I am currently doing. But I don't necessarily think of it in those terms. I think of it as, I'm going to buy a service that does this for me. And the two almost mesh. It's invisible to us that's what we're doing, but in fact, it's what we're doing. You know what I mean?
I do indeed, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because this isn't a modern phenomenon. I encourage the MSPs that I work with to focus on what they're good at, and to build up strategic alliances with other IT companies who provide complementary services. So, for instance, lots of the MSPs on the line will probably be familiar with clients approaching them and saying, "Hey, can you put together a website for us?" Well, you can. It's possible to do. We've all got a knowledge of IT as MSPs, and we could put together a website. Is that the best use of your time? Are you an expert in it? Or is there somebody that you could buddy up, that you could partner with to deliver that service and the SEO that goes with it and all the other services, all the other things, Google AdWords and everything else that needs expertise? I am firmly in the camp that says, as an MSP, you focus on core competencies and you surround yourself with people who can deliver services to your clients, much more efficiently and with much more expertise than you can. And I'm also a fan of taking that idea to your own business as well. So, strategic alliances, we think of outsourcing work on behalf of our clients, but why not outsource your own MSP website to another company? Why not outsource the SEO? Why not outsource, or delegate any of these services? So, as I said, this isn't a modern phenomenon. I know I was listening to our mutual friend Robert Crane across in Australia when he was talking to you about some of these globalization topics, and he mentioned a book that Robert and I are huge fans of, The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. Now, that really brought this idea of reducing the amount of work that you do and outsourcing and delegating to the general public conscious. But it's been around for ages. It's been many, many years since I've been an MSP owner. Even way back in the day, though, I used to outsource stuff such as telephone call answering, overflow, some email management. And my own MSP's business website was outsourced to Derek Brown across at Pronto Marketing, who does a phenomenal job, across there in Thailand of managing many MSP business owners' websites and that. So it isn't a new phenomenon, and again, I'm sort of surprised that more MSPs haven't triggered onto that they can go to other places in the world, they can get better quality of service for a lower cost than they could ever deliver it themselves.
Right. Well, and even services like one of the people we're going to talk to in a few months, they do outsourced management of your accounting, so and their employees are all over the place. So, it's sort of like the getting your podcast transcribed. There's a whole world of people out there willing to do this, and sometimes I'm shocked at how fast they are and how good they are, because a lot of these people, sometimes in the U.S. anyway, we think that people who are low paid have lower skills. But a lot of these people in other countries, their culture is such that they're extremely educated. Some of them, they got master's degrees and they're working for what we consider to be extremely low wages. But in their country, they're probably living high on the hog.
Yeah. One of my favorite interviews that I've heard in recent times was with a chap called Chris Ducker, who runs a virtual assistant company. I believe it's based out in the Philippines. And he was saying, the work ethic of people there is incredibly high. The skill level is incredibly high. It's just that the financial situation there is completely different to the US, the UK, Australia. You can live like a king over there for so much less than you can do here. And that's how they're able to offer the services, the virtual assistants in the Philippines and places like that, for so much more. And of course, this is, for me, it's a no-brainer. If the quality of service is there, if the communication is there, if the costs are way less, why wouldn't you use it? Now, there are some caveats to that. I think, you and I, both in our MSP days, used to use Zenith Infotech, the outsourced NOC and help desk service. At the time, I used to use the NOC services, which were located in India, and thought incredibly highly of the technicians there and the work that they did. Would I be comfortable with those same technicians speaking directly to my customers with some of the communication issues that you can come across? Not so much there. But there are jobs that can be outsourced, and you can manage the whole process without the client ever knowing. The upshot is the client gets much better service than if you tried to do that work yourself, and your profit margin should be much higher.
Right. Now, one of the things that I learned now it's Continuum, but it used to be Zenith Infotech, is I learned to be extremely precise about giving directions. If you say, go, open port, whatever, 4545 on this firewall and point it to this IP address, they will be able to do that. But it's much more important for me to say, use this username and this password to connect to the server, and then you can only get to the firewall from the inside. So then use this address and this username and password to connect to the firewall. First, back up the firewall configuration to the server hard drive at this location, then open this port, forward it to this IP address, then save another copy of the firewall configuration. So now I have a before and after copy. I need to be very, very precise because I can't assume in any way that they're going to do it the way that my company does it. I really shouldn't make those assumptions with a technician who's sitting next to me, but at least if they're sitting next to me, they can say, what did you want me to do with this? But when you've got a time gap of, whatever it is, 10 hours, and you want to get this work done, then it's a whole different animal.
It is, but I think it's a really powerful and important lesson in working with outsourcing, with delegation, with virtual assistants, whichever terminology you want to use for them, because it really helps you to understand, how am I going to explain the work that I need doing concisely but effectively to someone else? And it can teach you to write better internal processes for your own staff, as you mentioned there. And so speaking to someone whose first language may not be English, you've got to be really clear, and you can't use any local colloquialisms, you can't use any slang or terminology like that. I know it's interesting, I've just picked up on the fact that Americans call it Zenith Infotech. I call it Zenith Infotech. I'm probably the one who was wrong, back in the day. But interesting, so if I'm talking to a client about Zenith Infotech, they might look at me with my accent, my broad English accent, and say, well, what are you talking about? So it's learning those little nuances that's really important. But I think it is a valuable lesson to learn, because if you learn how to delegate work effectively to someone the other side of the world whose first language might not be English, you're going to get really, really good, really fast at delegating work to anybody, anywhere in the world, including the technician who sat across the desk from you. So very valuable, I think.
That is certainly true. If anybody has any questions, go ahead and put them into the question category on the webinar screen. We'd be very happy to take those. So, Richard, one of the things that I know about you is I know that you occasionally make your way to New York, and I think that's maybe a 5-hour time difference, right?
And the rest are 7 hours. A 5-hour time difference, 7.5-hour journey.
Yeah. So it is almost the same as going from one end of the United States to another, right? About the same distance and time and so forth. So do you find that that travel actually helps you with your business, or is it just out having a good time?
Oh, it incredibly helps. I mean, the old phrase that travel broadens the mind. I put a lot of the success that I've experienced, previously in MSP and now, to the fact that I spend a lot of time in different parts of the world learning off the best people in the industry who are hugely kind with their time, yourself included, for me to show up and listen to, basically, and pick advice from. I spent a lot of time in the USA specifically understanding the growing MSP culture years and years ago. I think my first trip to the USA in a work capacity was the Microsoft Worldwide Partner Conference, and it absolutely blew my mind. So you're suddenly exposed to not only, the best people from that part of the world, but the best people from everywhere in the world are getting together under one roof. So the Worldwide Partner Conference was a real game changer for me, and just soaking up that knowledge and soaking up the idea of what is possible and taking that back to the UK. And then for me as an MSP owner, I remember attending ConnectWise IT Nation, the CompTIA conferences in the US, and building up relationships with people, learning from them, and bringing all of that knowledge back to the UK and applying it to my own business. Interestingly, though, I think you can replicate this experience by building relationships with experts in different parts of the world and staying in touch regularly. Almost like a mastermind group, a distributed mastermind group. So you've alluded to the fact that yourself, me, and your brother Manny, we get in touch quite regularly for our coaching calls and bounce ideas. For myself, I've got plenty of other people. I introduced an Australian IT entrepreneur, Tim Brewer, on what it takes to be a successful IT entrepreneur on my own podcast recently. Tim works in both the US and Australia with some of the biggest players in the MSP industry there. Someone else who springs to mind, I speak with Eric Dosel at Brightgauge down in Florida. Now, Eric is my go-to guy on MSP metrics and key performance indicators, and he works with a ton of the most successful MSPs worldwide. And I've already mentioned our mutual friend Robert Crane in Australia, who's a genuine, top shelf SharePoint and Office 365 expert, knows everything there is to know about that. Robert's one of the smartest guys in the industry. He spots trends way ahead of the majority of us. So you can be sure that I speak with Robert as often as I can. The guy's a genius. So there's all these experts that I speak to in different parts of the world, some of which I've only met once or twice. But we've built relationships via social media, via email. But importantly, you then take the time to actually take those relationships, to telephone, make it something more than just social media and email. There's huge amounts of value to be gained from those relationships. And back in the day when I was an MSP, the relationships that I built with other MSPs in other parts of the world, massively invaluable. I can tell you as an MSP owner, it always flabbergasts your clients, small businesses in my part of the world, when they come to you and say things like, well, Richard, we're opening a satellite office in New York, or we've just acquired a business in Houston, Texas. You're an IT guy. Anything you can do to help? And I say, sure, let me introduce you to an IT company just down the road. And if they don't work out, I know of another 2 in that area. Now, the value that brought to my clients was, mind-blowing. They're like, wow, does this guy know everybody in the IT industry in the entire world? Well, no, I don't, but I made a point.
But as long as they think you do.
Exactly. And interestingly, I've just talked about Eric being an expert in MSP metrics, Eric Dosel at Brightgauge, Tim Brewer on IT entrepreneurialism, Robert Crane on SharePoint Office 365, yourself and Manny on service delivery. These experts in different parts of the world, it doesn't matter if they're around the corner or not. You can set up Skype calls, you can pick their brains and get expertise remotely. So as MSPs, if you can't find somebody who's, let's say, a SharePoint expert in your local area, look further afield in your country. Do a Google search. You will find people. It doesn't matter where in the world they are. There are logistical challenges, of course, with time zones and things that we've already talked about and local culture. But why restrict yourself to the expertise locally when you've got this global stage of experts that you can go and learn from? I think it's just a wonderful thing, and I've been using it for years and years, and will continue to do so for as long as I live.
Right. The other thing that many people may not be aware of is that those of us who run IT Pro user groups talk to each other all over the world on a Yahoo group. And so anybody who wants to get connected to IT support pretty much anywhere, we can help get people connected. Do I know somebody in Perth who can help me with something? Maybe, maybe not, but I know somebody who knows somebody. Right. And so it's, exactly. The whole 6 degrees of separation of the entire IT industry is available to us. And, that's something a lot of people don't think about. So,
I mean, if anybody listening to this call feels overawed, it's like, well, how am I going to build a relationship with an Office 365 expert at the other side of the world? Don't worry about it. The very first step that you can take to be exposed to the wider IT community, the global IT community, is to get yourself down to your local user group. Now, I wasn't even aware there was such an event as the Microsoft Worldwide Partner Conference before I attended my local user group for the first time. I wasn't even aware there was this absolute genius called Carl Palacher over in California, who produced these wonderful books when I was starting out as an MSP business owner. I went to my local user group, started asking the questions, and people pointed me in the directions of your books and of other resources like that. So, you know, what do they say? The longest journey starts with a single step. It's absolutely true. Get yourself down to your local user group. It will expose you to a wider community, which could include experts the other sides of the world, events, vendors, tools that you would never be aware of. But try and do it on your own.
Right. Well, it's interesting. So back in the day when Harry was sort of making his first forays into India, and was helping me to distribute my first book on documentation, he took some with him. And so I remember he called me from India and he said, what's the cheapest you can sell this book for? And I said, well, I don't know. What's the deal? And he said, well, I think the going price in India, and this was 10 years ago, the going price in India would only be about $1.50. I said, well, that's cheaper than I'm willing to sell it for. So, I'd much rather you, find a dumpster than to sell my book at that price, because I don't want to devalue the book. But today it's actually better. One of the things that a lot of folks are not aware of is, you can go on Wikipedia and look up the consumer price index of every country in the world. And, it's all a relative thing, but there are these numbers that go from very high to very low. And when you look at something and you say, well, countries like the US and the UK obviously have a very high consumer price index compared to many of the countries, even in Europe, but in Africa and Central and South America, Asia. Everybody's got something that works, that's different for their country. So, back to the question of outsourcing, I don't feel bad sending jobs to the Philippines, because I'm not really sending jobs anywhere. In some ways, what I'm doing is helping folks there improve their economy. And so in terms of the globalization, I love engaging people in the UK, South Africa, the Philippines, India. I really feel like the dollar ties, the monetary ties that bring us together help us create world peace. I really honestly believe that. I think that the more that we help other countries see us as something that they need, the friendlier they're going to be. And, we have seen such horrible things worldwide in the last, 15 years. It's just unbelievable. On the other hand, we're seeing spectacular, wonderful things as well. I mean, look at all the people who are rushing to help in Nepal. And, we saw the same thing when there were, earthquakes in other countries. And, the global piece of this is really spectacular. And people can, any one of us can play a role in that. You don't have to sit and wait for somebody else to figure out how to make the world a better place. Anybody can participate in that. And so whether we like it or not, we're part of this economy that is truly global in nature. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, from an ethical point of view, I don't think there's any conflict at all. I think, outsourcing work in that way, as you say, expands not only your horizons, but for me, it's all about equal opportunity. If the best person to do the work for you, the real expert, is the other side of the world, I've got no challenge at all doing it. And yet, this is coming from somebody, I've got a very green head on me, so I tend to buy local produce. So I do, I buy local for a lot of things, but when it comes to skills and that, I think, it's a global market. So I'm very comfortable buying local products, but sourcing skills worldwide.
But my guess is there's not a lot of local bananas in the UK. I'm just a wild guess.
Not so much, no.
So,
not even with our castle.
Right, not in your castle. No, that's true. So, well, and the other thing is that, when we think about this, and you've traveled quite a bit, more than most people, I think, in terms of the number of borders that you've crossed and the frequency with which you've done it. Um, do you think that MSPs are missing the boat by not trying to figure out how they can make money with services in other countries or with partnerships in other countries?
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. I think we've talked about the expertise that's available globally, and how easy it is to find people to do that work now to such a high quality. So, one of the websites is that I've used in the past is 99 Designs, where you can, if you need a new logo designing or something like that, you can put it out there. But I know you're a fan of the site as well, but Fiverr.com.
Yes.
The amount of great quality things, and some real innovative thinking that I found on Fiverr.com has been exceptional as well. But further than that, just go out and finding experts in different parts of the world, harnessing that expertise, delivering services to your clients faster and to a higher quality, and in most cases cheaper than you ever could if you tried to do it all yourself. Absolutely, I think MSPs are missing a trick. And I think it fundamentally comes down to the fact of MSPs trying to be a jack of all trades, trying to do everything themselves. And I absolutely believe that, once you clear borders or delimit the type of work that you do for clients. So if a client approaches you and says, hey, can you redesign our website? You can say, actually, no, that's not what we do, but let me introduce you to somebody who can do that for you, or let us project manage you doing that for someone else, and so on and so forth. It makes so much sense. It frees up your time to do what you're best at. And again, getting back to what we touched on earlier in the conversation, isn't that essentially what, as MSPs, the primary benefit we're selling to clients, SMBs that we work with? We tell them, hey, don't bother messing around with Ethernet cables. Don't bother messing around installing PCs. You've got better things to do. You want to run your own business. Let us carry on with that. So I think, overall, I'd say for MSPs to listen to their own marketing message a little bit more and have a good hard look at what they're doing within their business that perhaps they don't need to be doing, what they could outsource locally, globally, whatever, as long as they're focusing on doing what they do best. What's the most effective use of their time, in other words?
Right. What's funny is that really the focus is always on, well, who is the best person for the job and who can do the best job. And sometimes that just happens to be somebody in another country. I had actually kind of a humorous incident recently. You referred me to someone to help me do some formatting of stuff for Kindle. And so we did a few projects with her, and then she was in the UK. But she got so busy, she gave me a referral to somebody else. So we did a few projects with that person. And then at some point, that person connected with me on Facebook, and I realized, wait a minute, the second person isn't in the UK at all. She's in the United States. I didn't even know that.
Well, so I've got another shock for you as well. Jo, who I referred you to, she's not in the UK. She is British, but she lives in France.
Oh.
So Jo lives... Yeah, so there you go. So, and isn't that interesting, Cole? That you're very, very savvy when it comes to these things. You didn't notice because what is there to notice?
Right.
Jo's not going to speak with a French accent when she speaks to you. She's British,
right?
But she happens to live in France. In the same way that I mentioned Derek Brown and his team at Pronto Marketing. They live in Thailand, but Derek is an American, a former director at Microsoft. What does it matter where people are? And so when we talk about globalization, it's not just going to people in different parts of the world. It could be that you manage your business from different parts of the world as well. You're not restricted. I remember somebody saying to me years ago, go and explore the world, Richard. Have mouse, will travel. And it's true. It's absolutely true. I talked about spending a lot of time in the US learning off the best in the industry. And I did that while running an MSP here in the UK. Now, there are challenges that go with it. But really, travel does broaden the horizon, and you can do a lot of the management of businesses locally. Just as a side note, on my own podcast that I'm going to release very soon, I'm speaking to a chap called Mark Gadsden, who is a Brit. He runs an ISP based in London that has technical support in Canada. Oh, and Mark, the business owner, also lives in Andorra. So
Andorra.
in Europe, so Andorra, so absolutely beautiful part of the world, a fantastic place to live and work. His team, his technical team is in Canada. He's got staff in London, and they've got clients all over the world. So, it just goes to show you, it doesn't really matter where the people are, where the business owners are. You can serve in different time zones across the world with, I won't say with ease, but with a lot more flexibility than you ever could before.
Right. Well, I have a much smaller MSP business now, but my first MSP business that I got rid of a few years ago, we had people in Mexico, in all the way across the United States on the other ocean, and in Washington State. So we sort of were all over this continent. And it kind of doesn't matter once you figure out how you're going to do business on those terms. And, so whether it's across a border or not, it's becoming less relevant. The main challenge I think people have is that different countries have different attitudes and laws about where data gets stored and how you do certain things. So, if you're working with somebody in another country, you need to be sensitive that, okay, well, we don't want this backup to cross international boundaries, or in some cases, we're not allowed to have the backup cross international boundaries, but that doesn't mean tech support can't cross those boundaries. There are also some clients who are real adamant that, they want to know and meet and look into the eyes of everybody who touches their data. Well, that client isn't going to be able to have tech support from India or the Philippines because, they're not going to ever get to know those people. So some people have to have that local component. Other people are perfectly okay as long as the job gets done, having it be done outsourced somewhere else.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, isn't it? I mentioned earlier on that when I was using Zenith Infotech, I'm getting there, back in the day, or Continuum as they now, I use them for their, the behind-the-scenes stuff, the NOC stuff, the Network Operations Center stuff, anything that wasn't client-facing. And I was reluctant to use their help desk and that because it would be somebody either with a Canadian or American, North American, or an Indian accent that'd be speaking to my clients. And I made the assumption that my clients would not like that, but it purely was an assumption. I never went to them and said, hey, how would you feel about this? And interestingly, I had a conversation with an MSP who was talking about exactly the same challenge. They said, oh, well, my clients really wouldn't like if they got through on the phone and they got an American accent or something for the service desk. And one of the other MSPs who overheard the conversation said, well, you say that, one of our members of staff living in Britain is an American, he lives across here, and our clients absolutely love him. They ask for him by name, they love the accent and everything. Now, I'm not saying for a moment that, that's going to be a good fit for everyone, but I think often we make assumptions of what our clients will and will not like, and it's probably projecting our own fears on our clients. So I'd encourage you, if you're looking into client-facing work from anywhere in the world, don't dismiss it out of hand. Speak to your clients. Some of them are going to, of course, they're going to be, well, we would prefer to have it local. We'd prefer to meet the person. But many of them are going to say, look, Richard, as long as we're getting the service, we don't care in the world where it's served from, as long as we're getting the service and the security element is there. So no, I think the lesson there, never make assumptions over what your clients will and won't buy.
That is a great point. I got to say, one of my big things I always tell people is don't have both sides of the conversation. You say, oh, my clients wouldn't sign a service agreement. My clients wouldn't put up with late fees. My clients wouldn't, wait an hour to get support on a low priority ticket. Oh, have you asked them, and so this is another great example of that, it's funny because, as an American, I'm obviously the first thing is I'm insulted that anybody would not want to hear our lovely accent. But you would think about it, like, okay, I can clearly tell when somebody is from the UK versus Canada. So why wouldn't somebody in the UK be able to tell the same thing? So, it makes sense, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad thing. Especially our countries tend to get along very well and have historically. So, well, for at least the last 150 years.
Yeah.
So, Anyway, it's a great point. Don't have both sides of that conversation. Let the client have their side of it. So, all right, I'm going to ask.
As well, just
go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to just make one further point on that as well, going back to something really, really simple I was speaking to an MSP about the other day, and that's the whole, and I know you'll agree with me on this one, the telephone being an interruption. Telephone ringing throughout the day, it's an interruption, you can't get on with your work. And I said, well, why don't you hire a call answering service for overflowing things? And they again said, our clients wouldn't put up with getting through to somebody who's not part of the team. I said, well, treat them as part of the team then. And I know back in the day when I had an MSP, we used to have a call answering service, so we weren't constantly being interrupted by telephone calls. And our clients actually thought when they got through to Sally or to Claire that they were sat in our office.
Right.
And you know what, Carl? I didn't correct them. I didn't say, well, actually, Sally and Claire are sat down in Cardiff. The clients just thought they were part of the team. So again, going back to what we're saying, just don't make assumptions or over what the client will and not put up with.
Right. Well, it's funny. So I was talking to somebody in the U.S. a while back who has an outsourced call service that they buy from Scotland. And I'm like, well, why would you do that? I mean, it's obvious that they're not going to have an American accent. And he said, it's because of their accent. People are disarmed by what they, what sounds like a smiling, happy person with a nice Scottish accent. It literally disarms people who might otherwise be angry and frustrated and whatever. They're like, oh my God, so where are you from? And,
I love it.
That's a strategy. I did want to say, if folks have any questions, go ahead and put them in the question box or raise your hand. We're just about done here, so let me give you a little note about what's coming up in the future. We have next month, VJ from New Zealand is going to be talking about, kind of why he set up business across boundaries. Richard and I both have a friend, Chris, who is from South Africa and is now in the UK. And so at least Americans, I think, they can never tell the difference between those two accents. But BJ, you could definitely tell his accent, and he has set up businesses in several different countries. And so it's just kind of an interesting thing, like, why would you do that, and how would you do the research to figure out how to expand your business into another country? And then we're going to talk in June to the folks at TechSoup about some stuff that they're doing to help nonprofit agencies around the globe. And, if you're not familiar with TechSoup, go check out TechSoup.org. They provide the IT software and some hardware for nonprofit agencies, and that can now include religious groups. So it used to be that churches were excluded, and for a few years now, even churches are able to use their nonprofit services. And companies such as Microsoft and Cisco donate things through TechSoup and use that as their charitable arm for distributing licensing and hardware. And so they specifically have programs set up for nonprofit agencies in lesser developed countries. So anyway, we're going to talk to them about that. And then in July, Todd Lay from Simple Back Office is going to talk to us about managing clients overseas. So again, just a reminder, I love this graphic, and Harry made a note about it on Facebook today. We are such a globally connected world, and it's getting smaller every day as we get better and better communication. Again, we all come together to help the folks in Nepal, and literally the world came together to support the United States when the airplanes crashed into the buildings on September 11th. And, that kind of thing is what really makes us as a people stronger, is the connections that we build with other countries. So, Richard, I thank you for everything you do for this business, for the industry, and in particular for the international component you bring to all of it. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Carl. I appreciate it. I'm honored that you would ask me to be on your webinar today. Thanks so much.
And you've got webinars coming up, and folks can always check that out at tubblog.co.uk. And we're going to put all these links on the site that you see at the bottom of the slide there at smallbizthoughts.com/events/global. so that folks can link directly to all the things that we mentioned today. Thank you very much for your time. This concludes our broadcast.